Come, and find a quiet place to rest. Let the weight of the day settle, let it drift from your shoulders and dissolve into the stillness around you. Allow your breath to be your anchor, a gentle, rhythmic tide that pulls you away from the shore of your thoughts and out into a calm, open sea. In this space, there is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to be. You are simply here, an awareness floating in the quiet dark. And in this quiet, in this darkness, we can begin to wonder. Let your mind drift upward, past the ceiling above you, past the thin veil of the atmosphere that holds our world in its gentle, blue embrace. See the curve of the earth, a marbled sphere of impossible color suspended in the absolute black. Pull back further still, past the silent, pockmarked face of the moon, our constant, lonely companion. Watch as the earth shrinks, becoming a bright star, then a pinprick, lost in the swirling, luminous river of the Milky Way. You are now an observer in the grand, silent theater of the cosmos. Around you, nebulae bloom like watercolor flowers in slow motion, their vibrant gases painting masterpieces that will hang unseen for millennia. Stars are born in fiery, violent nurseries, and they die in silent, spectacular explosions, seeding the void with the dust of new beginnings. It is a place of profound, unimaginable scale, and of a silence so deep it feels like a presence, a physical weight against the soul. It is from this vantage point, this place of cosmic perspective, that we can ask a question. A gentle, speculative question that changes the light on everything we have ever known. Look back toward that infinitesimally small speck, that mote of dust where everything you have ever loved, everything you have ever feared, has played out its story. What if all of it, the oceans and the mountains, the turning of the seasons, the rise and fall of civilizations, the quiet beating of your own heart, what if all of it were just a test? Not a test in the way you might remember from a classroom, with harsh lights and the ticking of a clock, not a judgment with a clear pass or fail, but something quieter, something more profound. A test of potential. An experiment set in motion by a silent, patient intelligence, or perhaps by the universe itself, simply to see what might happen. What if this world is a laboratory, a single, isolated trial running in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, and we, all of us, are the subjects of its one and only question? A question not written in words, but in the language of physics, of chemistry, of biology. A question whispered in the first flicker of starlight and echoing down through the 4.5 billion years of this planet's lonely journey around its sun. It is a thought that can feel cold at first, as if it strips away our meaning, rendering us mere data points in some grand, unknowable equation. But stay with it for a moment. Let the initial chill pass. Because perhaps it is not a cold thought at all. Perhaps it is the most wondrous thought imaginable. It suggests a purpose, a reason, a framework for the beautiful, chaotic, and often inexplicable unfolding of existence. It implies that the universe is not just a random collection of matter and energy, but a place of inquiry. It suggests that something, somewhere, is curious. And we, in our brief, flickering moment of awareness, are an answer in the making. Let us explore this idea together, not as a truth to be proven, but as a story to be told. A story that might help us see the world, and our place within it, in a slightly different light. Let's imagine the parameters of this experiment, the curriculum of this cosmic school, and the nature of the questions being asked. Let's trace the story from the very beginning, from the first moments of this planetary test, and see where it leads us, here, tonight, in this quiet and peaceful dark. Before a single question could be posed to life, the classroom itself had to be built, and the materials for the lesson had to be prepared. The curriculum for this grand test began not on Earth, but in the unimaginable heat and pressure of dying stars, long before our sun had even begun to gather its own dust. Imagine the early universe, a vast, dark, and mostly empty space, filled with little more than the simplest, most fundamental elements, hydrogen and helium. These were the first words in the cosmic vocabulary, simple and pure. But you cannot build a world, you cannot sculpt a living thing, with only 2 words. The test required a richer language, a more complex set of tools. And so, the universe began its first and most patient lesson, the lesson of alchemy. Inside the hearts of the first generation of giant stars, gravity was the teacher. It crushed the simple atoms of hydrogen together, forcing them to fuse, to become something new. In this stellar furnace, a new element was forged, helium. But the lesson was far from over. As these stars aged, their cores grew hotter, their gravitational pull more immense. They began to teach the elements a new kind of dance, a dance of fusion that climbed a ladder of creation. Helium atoms were fused into carbon, the very backbone of life as we know it. Carbon was fused into oxygen, the breath of our world. Oxygen into neon, into magnesium, into silicon. And finally, in the last, desperate moments of a massive star's life, into iron. Each element was a new concept, a new potential introduced into the universe's expanding mind. Iron was the final lesson a star could teach in its lifetime. It was a point of stability, an element so tightly bound that to fuse it further would consume energy rather than release it. The star's core, now heavy with iron, could no longer hold itself up against its own immense gravity. And so, the star would die. It would collapse and then explode in a supernova, the most brilliant and violent event in the cosmos. But this death was not an end. It was a graduation. In that final, cataclysmic explosion, all the elements forged over 1 billion years of patient work were cast out into the void. The iron, the carbon, the oxygen, the silicon, all the building blocks of our world were scattered like seeds across the vast, dark fields of space. But the supernova's final, energetic flourish taught one last, crucial lesson. In its fleeting, unimaginable energies, it created the heavier elements, the gold in your ring, the uranium that warms the Earth's core, the silver that catches the light. This was the distribution of the raw materials, a curriculum of elements, patiently synthesized over eons and delivered across the galaxy on the shockwaves of dying stars. Our corner of the universe received its share of this inheritance. A vast cloud of gas and this precious, star-forged dust began to swirl, to condense, to feel the gentle, persistent pull of its own gravity. At its center, our sun ignited, a new teacher for a new system. And from the leftover disk of material, the planets formed. Among them, a small, rocky world, your world, gathered its share of the cosmic lesson plan. It collected the carbon, the oxygen, the nitrogen, the iron. It was a world seeded with potential, a crucible prepared with all the necessary ingredients. The first phase of the test was complete. The materials were present. The conditions were being set. The planet was a blank slate, a perfectly prepared examination booklet, awaiting the first, and perhaps most difficult, question of all. And the universe, having spent billions of years preparing this single location, settled into wait. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of anticipation. The classroom was ready. The slow, patient proctor of physical law was watching. And the test was about to begin. The young Earth was a place of extraordinary violence and chaos, a world utterly inhospitable to the delicate forms of life you know today. Imagine standing on its surface then, a sky of acrid orange haze, thick with carbon dioxide and sulfur, a sun dimmed by a perpetual smog. The air was a poison, thin and unbreathable. There were no continents as you know them, only a turbulent, global ocean of boiling, acidic water, punctuated by the black, jagged peaks of countless volcanoes spewing molten rock and toxic gases into the tormented atmosphere. Asteroids and comets, the leftover debris from the solar system's construction, rained down from the heavens in a relentless bombardment, their impacts vaporizing the seas and melting the crust. This was the laboratory bench upon which the first great question would be posed. It was not a gentle inquiry. It was a demand, shouted over the roar of volcanoes and the crash of celestial impacts. The question was this: in a universe that trends toward disorder, toward entropy, toward the slow, inevitable decay of all things, can order arise spontaneously? Can complexity assemble itself from chaos? Can something as miraculous as life begin? For hundreds of millions of years, the answer was silence. The planet churned, the ocean simmered, and the raw materials, the carbon, the hydrogen, the nitrogen, the oxygen, delivered by stars and comets, sloshed about in a warm, chemical soup. The universe, if it was indeed watching, was in no hurry. This part of the test was not about speed. It was about persistence. It was a test of the fundamental laws of nature themselves. Are the rules of chemistry and physics creative? Do they contain, hidden within their equations, a secret bias toward complexity? Slowly, imperceptibly, something began to happen in the sunlit shallows, or perhaps in the crushing, superheated darkness of deep-sea hydrothermal vents. Shielded from the harsh ultraviolet radiation of the young sun, simple molecules began to link together. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, formed spontaneously. Fatty lipids, drawn to one another, created tiny, hollow spheres, the first primitive membranes, the first walls separating an inside from an outside. These were not life, not yet. They were just the scattered letters of a new alphabet, floating randomly in the water. But then, the true miracle occurred. A molecule formed, perhaps by sheer, trillion-to-one chance, that had a remarkable property. It could make copies of itself. It was a replicator. This was the spark. This was the first tentative, whispered yes to the universe's deafening question. Life had begun. It was unimaginably simple, a fragile strand of replicating information, barely distinguishable from the chemical chaos that surrounded it. But it was a start. It was a foothold for order in a universe of entropy. This first life was the most profound answer imaginable. It demonstrated that matter, given enough time and the right ingredients, does not just break down. It also builds up. It organizes. It reaches for ever more intricate and beautiful forms. The test, at this stage, was not concerned with intelligence, or consciousness, or feeling. It was a test of matter's own inherent potential. Can a system governed by simple, blind laws generate something that appears to have purpose? The emergence of that first self-copying molecule was a resounding success. It was the moment the experiment proved viable. From that single, microscopic event, everything else would follow. For the next 3 billion years, life would remain simple, mostly single-celled organisms, quietly, patiently transforming the planet. They were the diligent students, working on the fundamentals. They learned to harness the energy of the sun through photosynthesis, and in doing so, they began to terraform their own classroom. They pumped oxygen into the atmosphere, a waste product for them, but a crucial ingredient for the next, more complex phase of the test. They changed the color of the sky from orange to blue. They altered the chemistry of the oceans. They were not just answering the question, they were rewriting it, creating a new set of conditions, a new examination paper for the generations that would follow. The universe waited, its patience infinite, as its creation slowly, methodically, prepared the stage for the next act. With the planet's atmosphere now rich in oxygen and its ocean stabilized, the examination entered a new, more dynamic phase. The questions were no longer about simple existence, but about form, function, and adaptation. Life, which had spent 3 billion years as a quiet, microbial hum, suddenly exploded in a riot of creativity. This was the Cambrian explosion, a period of evolutionary innovation so rapid and profound that it seems, in the fossil record, like a biological Big Bang. The test had moved from basic chemistry to advanced engineering and artistry. The new question was, what can you become? And the answers came in a bewildering, beautiful profusion of forms. Suddenly, the oceans teemed with creatures of fantastic design. Trilobites with their intricate, armored shells and complex compound eyes crawled along the seabed, the first creatures to truly see their world in high resolution. Anomalocaris, a giant predator with formidable grasping claws, swam through the waters, introducing a new, powerful pressure into the test, the pressure of being hunted. Life was now in a dynamic relationship with itself, a complex dance of predator and prey, each pushing the other to become faster, stronger, more perceptive. Every new body plan, every new sensory organ, was a unique solution to the puzzle of survival. Can you move through water efficiently? The sleek, fish-like form was an answer. Can you protect yourself from those who would eat you? The hard shell, the sharp spine, the camouflaged skin were all brilliant essays submitted for grading. Can you find food in the dark, silent depths? The sensitive feeler, the bioluminescent lure, were elegant responses. The Earth itself became a constantly changing examination hall. Continents drifted, mountains rose, and ice ages descended, rewriting the rules and posing new problems. When the plants, descendants of those early photosynthetic microbes, began to colonize the barren land, they were answering a bold new question. Can life conquer a dry and hostile environment, away from the nurturing cradle of the ocean? They developed roots to anchor themselves and draw water, rigid stems to reach for the sunlight, and waxy coatings to prevent dehydration. They passed the test. Their success created a new opportunity, a new challenge for the animals. And so, the first amphibians crawled tentatively from the water, their fins slowly transforming into legs, their gills supplemented by primitive lungs. They were the pioneers, the first to submit an answer to the question of terrestrial life. Each new environment was a new test paper. The air itself became a challenge. Can you move through this thin, invisible medium? And the insects, and later the pterosaurs, the birds, and the bats, all provided their own unique, ingenious answers, developing the miracle of flight. The age of dinosaurs was a particularly dramatic chapter in this ongoing examination. For over 150 million years, these magnificent creatures dominated the planet. their immense size and diversity a testament to life's creative power. They were a triumphant answer to the question of what life could achieve on a grand scale. But the test was not designed to be easy. The universe, it seems, includes sudden, unpredictable events. An asteroid, a 6-mile-wide rock traveling at unimaginable speed, struck the Earth, ending the reign of the dinosaurs in a global cataclysm of fire and darkness. This was the ultimate pop quiz. The rules had changed in an instant. The questions of size and strength were suddenly irrelevant. The new question was simple and brutal. Can you survive the apocalypse? And in the shadow of the fallen giants, a new set of answers emerged. The small, the adaptable, the warm-blooded mammals who had been scurrying in the undergrowth for millions of years, suddenly found their moment. They had been quietly studying, preparing for a test they didn't know was coming. Their ability to regulate their own body temperature, their small size and modest needs, their diet of insects and seeds, these were the traits that allowed them to pass the test of extinction. From these humble survivors, a new wave of innovation would arise, leading, eventually, down a very specific, very peculiar path. The examination of adaptation had proven that life was not just persistent. It was resilient, creative, and endlessly inventive. But the hardest question was yet to come. For billions of years, the test had been an external one. It was a matter of chemistry, of physics, of bodies, and their relationship to the world around them. The questions were about survival, procreation, and the clever engineering of flesh and bone. The answers were written in the language of genetics, in the shape of a wing or the sharpness of a tooth. But as the age of mammals unfolded, a new and far more subtle examination began. The focus shifted from the external world to the internal one. The new testing ground was not the forest or the sea, but the intricate, folded landscape of the brain. The question was no longer just about survival, but about awareness. It was a question whispered into the growing complexity of neural networks. Can you know that you exist? This was the dawn of consciousness, the most profound turning point in the planet's long history. Imagine a creature, an early hominid on the plains of Africa, perhaps 3 million years ago. It has a brain larger and more complex than its ancestors. One evening, it looks up from its foraging and sees the vast, star-dusted canopy of the night sky. For billions of years, creatures had seen this sight. Their eyes had registered the photons of light. Their brains had processed it as a pattern. But for them, it was just that, a pattern, a backdrop, no more meaningful than the texture of a rock or the shape of a leaf. But for this particular creature, on this particular night, something different happens. It does not just see the stars, it sees them. A flicker of something new ignites in its mind. A sense of wonder. A feeling of smallness in the face of immensity. And with that feeling, a question begins to form, a question without words, a vague and powerful curiosity. What is that? In that moment, the universe, through this creature's eyes, became aware of itself. The test had entered its most advanced, most abstract phase. The subject was no longer biology, but metaphysics. The emergence of self-awareness was a slow, gradual dawn, not a single event. It was in the first tool, deliberately shaped not just for immediate use, but saved for a future purpose, demonstrating a mind that could travel in time. It was in the first moment one of these beings looked at its reflection in a still pool of water and understood, not that it was seeing another creature, but that it was seeing itself. A sense of it had separated itself from the world. This was a development of staggering significance. For the first time on this planet, a piece of the universe could contemplate its own existence. The test was no longer just about the system's ability to create complexity, but about its ability to recognize and reflect upon that complexity. Can the experiment become aware that it is an experiment? Can the subjects of the test begin to ponder the nature of the test itself? This new consciousness was a tool of immense power. It allowed for planning, for strategy, for a kind of problem-solving that went far beyond the instinctual reactions of other animals. It allowed for the development of language, a way to share the contents of one mind with another, to create a collective consciousness. But this new awareness was also a great burden. With it came the knowledge of mortality, the certainty of one's own eventual death. With it came the capacity for new kinds of suffering, for anxiety about the future, for grief for the past, for the lonely, existential dread of being a single, separate self in a vast and silent universe. This was the great paradox of the new test. The prize of self-awareness came with a heavy price. The question now was whether this new, fragile consciousness could bear its own weight. Could it find meaning in a world it now knew to be finite? Could it overcome the fear that its newfound awareness had revealed? The universe watched, holding its breath, as its creation opened its eyes and, for the very first time, looked back. With the arrival of self-awareness, the examination shifted once more. It was no longer an individual test, a measure of one creature's ability to survive and reproduce. It became a group project, the most complex and challenging of all. The new subject on the curriculum was empathy. The new questions were about connection, about community, about the space between one conscious mind and another. Can these self-aware beings, each trapped in the solitude of their own skull, learn to bridge that gap? Can they build something larger and more meaningful than the sum of their individual lives? The first evidence of a passing grade came not in a grand discovery, but in a quiet, humble act of compassion. In the fossil record, we find the bones of early humans who were old and infirm, who had suffered debilitating injuries that would have made it impossible for them to hunt or gather food for themselves. In a world governed purely by the cold logic of survival of the fittest, these individuals would have been left behind to perish. Yet they lived on, for years in some cases. Their bones tell a story of care. Someone brought them food. Someone protected them from predators. Someone tended to their wounds. This was a new kind of answer, an answer written not in the language of genetics, but in the language of grace. It was the first sign that something more than instinct was at play. A new force had entered the world, love. This new phase of the test was explored and documented around the flickering light of ancient fires. Here, for the first time, language evolved beyond simple warnings and commands into something richer, storytelling. As they shared the stories of the day's hunt, of their ancestors, of the spirits they imagined in the woods and the stars, they were weaving the first threads of culture. They were creating a shared reality, a web of meaning that connected them to one another and to the world around them. A story is a form of empathy. It allows you to step inside another person's experience, to feel what they feel, to see the world through their eyes. The test was now measuring the capacity to build these shared worlds of meaning. And then came art. In the deep, silent darkness of caves in France and Spain, these early humans created breathtaking murals. They painted the great beasts that roamed their world, the bison, the horse, the mammoth, with a skill and sensitivity that still moves us today. Why did they do this? It was not for simple survival. These paintings were not a tool for hunting. They were something else. They were an expression of awe, of reverence, of a deep connection to the world. They were an attempt to capture the beauty and the mystery of existence and to share it with others. This was a profound submission to the test. It showed that consciousness was not just for problem solving. It was for creating beauty. It was for making meaning where there was none before. The development of agriculture, the building of the first villages and then cities, were all extensions of this group project. They were massive experiments in cooperation. Could thousands, and then millions, of conscious individuals learn to live together, to subordinate their own selfish desires for the good of the whole? The test was now about social structures, about laws, about ethics. The questions became more and more complex. What is justice? What is fairness? What do we owe to one another? Philosophers, prophets, and poets emerged, each offering their own answers, their own blueprints for how to build a just and compassionate society. Of course, the answers were often conflicting, and the experiments often failed. But the effort itself was what mattered. The test was not about finding a single, perfect solution. It was about the struggle, the debate, the ongoing, multi-millennial effort to understand how to be good to one another. Every act of selfless kindness, every shared laugh, every moment of collective grief, every piece of art that bridges the gap between two souls, is a point scored in this ongoing examination of empathy. It is the universe testing its own capacity for connection, using us as the medium. The gift of higher consciousness, the very tool that allowed for empathy in art, came with a terrible and dangerous shadow. The same intelligence that could compose a symphony could also design a weapon of unimaginable cruelty. The same mind that could contemplate the stars could also rationalize the subjugation of its own kind. This was the great, paradoxical twist in the examination, the section of the test designed to be so difficult that it could lead to the failure of the entire project. The new subject was wisdom, and its central question was this: can a species that has unlocked the power of a god learn to wield it without destroying itself? The seeds of this paradox were planted early. The very same capacity for cooperation and empathy that allowed for the creation of tribes and communities also created the concept of the other. The love for one's own group too often became the fear and hatred of the group across the river, over the mountain. The test of empathy had a dark reflection, the test of tribalism. And for much of human history, it was a test that was consistently failed. The development of language allowed for the sharing of knowledge, but it also allowed for the propagation of lies, of ideologies that divided people into believers and infidels, into the worthy and the unworthy. The story of civilization is, in many ways, the story of this internal conflict. It is a history written in the blood of wars fought over land, over resources, over gods, over ideas. Each conflict was a failed answer, a demonstration that the primal, reptilian parts of the brain still held powerful sway over the newer, more enlightened cortex. The scientific revolution was a particularly perilous turning point. Humanity began to systematically decipher the rulebook of the universe itself. We unlocked the secrets of the atom, the gene, the cosmos. This knowledge gave us incredible power, the power to cure diseases, to communicate instantly across the globe, to feed billions. But each new discovery came with a corresponding destructive potential. The understanding of chemistry that gave us fertilizers also gave us poison gas. The mastery of physics that lit our cities also gave us the atomic bomb. This was the ultimate test of wisdom. Here, laid bare, were the very keys to creation and destruction. What would we choose? The 20th century was a brutal and terrifying examination period. 2 world wars, genocides, and the constant, simmering threat of nuclear annihilation demonstrated just how tenuous our grasp on wisdom truly was. We had built a global civilization of immense technological power, but we had not yet developed the collective maturity to manage it. We were like toddlers playing with loaded guns. The test was no longer about whether we could survive an ice age or an asteroid. The new, and perhaps final, existential threat was ourselves. This is not to say that this phase of the test is a story of pure failure. It is a story of struggle. For every act of violence, there have been acts of profound courage and compassion. For every ideology of hate, there have been movements for peace, for justice, for civil rights. The same technology that created weapons also created a global communication network, allowing people on opposite sides of the world to see each other's humanity for the first time. The test is ongoing. The question of whether we can overcome our own worst instincts has not yet been fully answered. We live inside that very question right now. The paradox of our nature, our capacity for both breathtaking creativity and horrific destruction, is the central drama of our time. It is the problem we have been set, and the fate of our world, the outcome of the entire experiment, may well depend on the solution we provide. As we ponder the immense and intricate nature of this planetary test, a new question naturally arises, one that hums beneath all the others. Who, or what, is the proctor? Who is the silent observer grading these billions of years of effort? The mind, conditioned by our own stories, leaps to familiar images, a council of robed, ethereal beings, beings of pure light, or perhaps advanced extraterrestrial scientists in sterile, silver ships, monitoring our progress on some cosmic viewscreen. But perhaps the answer is both simpler and more profound. Perhaps the observer is not a being, not a consciousness separate from the system it is observing. Perhaps the observer is the system itself. Let us imagine that the fundamental laws of the universe, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, are not just a static set of rules, but are, in a sense, the examiners. They are the impartial, unfeeling, and utterly consistent proctors of this test. Gravity was the first proctor. It was gravity that gathered the dust to form the Earth, that pulled the densest materials to its core, generating the magnetic field that would one day shield life from solar radiation. Gravity posed the first questions about structure and scale. It was a test of integrity, and every star, every planet, every mountain range is a physical answer to its relentless inquiry. Then there is the law of thermodynamics, particularly the second law, the law of entropy. This is the proctor that insists all things must eventually fall apart, that order must decay into chaos. Life itself is a constant, desperate, and beautiful argument against this proctor. Every living cell, every complex organism, is a temporary defiance of entropy, a small, localized pocket of order maintained through a constant intake of energy. Life doesn't break the rule, but it creatively works within it. It is the ultimate loophole, and the second law of thermodynamics is the proctor that ensures the test is never, ever easy. The light from our sun is another observer, another examiner. It is the primary source of energy for the entire experiment, the fuel for the engine of life. But it is also a source of harsh, damaging radiation. The questions it poses are about balance. Can you harness my energy without being destroyed by it? Photosynthesis was the first brilliant answer. The development of skin, of pigments, of behaviors like seeking shade, were all subsequent, successful responses. And what of time itself? Time is perhaps the ultimate observer, the canvas upon which the entire experiment is painted. Time is the one dimension that allows for process, for evolution, for the slow, gradual unfolding of complexity. It is infinitely patient. It has witnessed the formation of galaxies and the fleeting life of a mayfly with the same detached, steady gaze. It doesn't judge. It doesn't interfere. It simply allows the story to unfold, one moment after another. In this view, there is no need for an external intelligence. The universe is testing itself. We are not separate from the experiment. We are the experiment's own, most complex manifestation. We are the universe's attempt to create a localized system that can, for a brief period, contemplate the very laws that gave rise to it. Our consciousness is the universe looking back at itself. Our science is the universe's attempt to read its own instruction manual. Our art is the universe's attempt to express its own beauty. The Proctors are not out there, among the stars. They are in here. They are in the very fabric of our being, in the atoms that make up our bodies, in the electrical signals that flash through our brains. They are the silent, unbreakable rules of the game. And the test is to see what kind of game can be played, what kind of beauty can be created, within those rules. There is no one to impress, no final grade to receive from an outside authority. The observation is the process itself, and the universe is both the student and the teacher, the classroom and the silent, watchful dean. As we approach the present moment in our long, speculative history of this planetary test, we find ourselves in the midst of what feels like the final examination. The challenges of the past, surviving ice ages, inventing agriculture, forming societies, were like the coursework and midterms, preparing us for this. Now, we face a set of interconnected, global-scale problems that will determine whether our particular brand of intelligent life is a sustainable phenomenon or a brief, brilliant, and ultimately self-terminating anomaly. This is the concept some scientists call the Great Filter, and it can be framed as the final, most difficult question of the test. The question is one of foresight and unity. Having developed the technological power to alter the entire planet's biosphere, can we now develop the collective wisdom and will to manage that power responsibly? The first part of this final exam is the climate crisis. For 2 centuries, our civilization has been powered by burning the fossilized remains of ancient life. This has been an incredibly successful strategy in the short term, fueling unprecedented growth and prosperity. But we now understand that this has been flooding our atmosphere with greenhouse gases, warming our planet, and destabilizing the very climate systems upon which our civilization depends. The test is clear. Can we, as a global species, transition our entire energy system to clean, sustainable sources before we trigger irreversible tipping points? It is a test of our ability to cooperate across national borders, to prioritize long-term well-being over short-term profit, and to listen to the clear, unambiguous warnings of our own scientific instruments. It is a test of our maturity. Another section of the exam involves the preservation of biodiversity. The intricate web of life that evolved over hundreds of millions of years is being frayed and torn apart by our activities. We are currently living through the 6th mass extinction event in the planet's history, but this one is unique. It is the first one to be caused by one of the planet's own inhabitants. The question here is one of stewardship. Do we recognize that our own survival is inextricably linked to the health of the ecosystems we inhabit? Can we learn to see the rest of life not as a resource to be endlessly exploited, but as a community to which we belong? Can we make room for the wild, for the other than human, or will our success come at the cost of silencing millions of other evolutionary stories forever? Then there is the ongoing test of our technological power, particularly in the realms of artificial intelligence and biotechnology. These tools hold the promise of solving many of our most pressing problems, of curing disease, ending poverty, and unlocking new realms of creativity. But they also carry immense risks. An uncontrolled superintelligence or a bioengineered pandemic could pose an existential threat as great as any we have faced. The test here is one of prudence and ethics. Can we develop and deploy these powerful technologies with caution, with foresight, and with a deep and abiding concern for their potential consequences? Can we ensure that these tools are used to benefit all of humanity, not just a select few? All of these questions are interconnected. They cannot be solved by one nation or one group of people alone. They require a level of global cooperation and shared identity that we have never before achieved. This is the core of the final exam. Can we finally transcend the tribal instincts that have defined so much of our past? Can we begin to think and act not as Americans or Chinese, not as members of this religion or that, but as citizens of a single, fragile planet? The Great Filter is a hypothesis that suggests that this stage, the transition from a planetary species to a stable, multi-planetary one, is where many intelligent civilizations might fail. They develop the technology to destroy themselves long before they develop the wisdom not to. Whether we pass or fail this test is not predetermined. The examination is happening right now. We are the ones sitting at the desks, pencil in hand. The choices we make in the coming decades, as individuals and as a collective, will be our answer. The universe, in its patient silence, awaits our submission. After this long journey through cosmic time, after considering the immense, intricate, and often terrifying challenges of this planetary test, it is easy to feel a sense of pressure, of cosmic scrutiny. It is easy to see history as a series of pass-fail moments, and to look at our present challenges with a deep anxiety, a fear of providing the wrong answer and failing the entire experiment. But now, as we draw this contemplation to a close, let us consider one final, gentle possibility. What if we have misunderstood the purpose of the test all along? What if the goal was never to arrive at a final, correct answer? What if there is no grade, no graduation, no next level to achieve? What if the point of the test was simply the experience of taking it? Let's imagine that the universe, in its vast, silent, and objective existence, lacked one crucial thing: subjective experience. It was a universe of unimaginable beauty, of swirling galaxies and burning stars, but with no one to witness it. It was a universe of profound physical laws, but with no one to wonder at them. It was a universe of immense potential, but that potential remained unrealized, UN felt. And so, the universe set up an experiment. It seeded a small, rocky world with the ingredients for life, and it posed a single, open-ended question. What is it like to be? The emergence of life was the first answer. The experience of metabolism, of replication, of simply being a living system. The development of senses, of sight, of sound, of touch, was a more complex answer. Through the eyes of the trilobite, the universe experienced sight for the first time. Through the ears of the first amphibians, it heard the sound of its own rain falling on its own land. The evolution of consciousness was the most profound answer of all. In us, the universe created a mirror. Through our minds, it could not only experience the world, but it could know that it was experiencing it. Your capacity for joy is the universe's way of feeling joy. The sorrow you feel at a loss is the universe grieving for a part of itself. The awe you feel when you look at the night sky is the universe marveling at its own handiwork. In this light, nothing is a failure. Every dead end in evolution, every extinct species, was not a mistake. It was simply a different, unique answer to the question of what it is like to be. The life of a dinosaur, in all its magnificent power, was a valid and beautiful experience for the universe to have. The brief, flickering life of a single bacterium is another. And your life, in all its complexity, its triumphs and its struggles, its moments of profound love and its moments of deep confusion, is the most intricate and nuanced answer yet. The test is not a judgment. It is a canvas. Every thought you have, every emotion you feel, every choice you make, is another brushstroke. The goal is not to paint a perfect picture, but simply to paint. To add your unique color, your unique texture, to the grand, cosmic masterpiece of subjective experience. So, what does this mean for us, here, in the quiet of this moment? It means we can release the pressure. The weight of passing or failing is lifted. Our purpose is not to achieve some grand, cosmic goal, but to simply live, to experience, to be as fully and as consciously as we can. Every act of kindness is not just a point scored, but is the universe experiencing its own capacity for compassion. Every moment of wonder is the universe experiencing its own mystery. There is no final judgment from a silent proctor. The grade, if there is one, is the experience itself. And by that measure, by the very fact that you are here, now, breathing, thinking, feeling, wondering, you have already passed with flying colors. You are a successful outcome. You are a living, breathing, and beautiful answer. So let this thought settle into you, as you settle into your rest. Let it bring a sense of peace, a sense of profound and gentle purpose. Your only task is to be here, to feel this moment, to breathe this breath. And in doing so, you are fulfilling the deepest and most beautiful desire of the cosmos, the desire to know itself. And now, it is time to rest, to let the questions fade, and to simply be the answer. Gently now, let go.